I've got two panelists. One probably the ultimate expert on the subject, Mr. Mazur, who has already been introduced to you. Therefore, it is enough that he will be supervising, in a way, the MENA FATF peer group review for the United Arab Emirates. And I recommend you all be a bit kind with him, because he will examine you at a later stage. We've also got Ghassan Shibli, whom I would ask to introduce himself.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for inviting me here. I'm an advisor at Financial Integrity Network, a strategic company based in Washington, D.C. My expertise is sanctions and counterterrorism finance, where I used to be one of the experts on the UN panel of experts investigating the financial support to Al-Shabaab in Somalia and arms groups in Sudan. So I'm now based here in the UAE. Thank you.
Now let me add, Ghassan, of course, is a very modest man, because the Financial Integrity Network he's working for was set up by some of the best regulatory specialists in the United States. You have Chip Ponzi there from the Federal Reserve, and who have Juan Zarate, who was formerly with Stuart Levy at the Treasury, so are really top-notch when it comes to American regulators and their experience, both in regulation but also in the fight against terrorism. Juan Zarate was leading all that at the Treasury, and therefore Ghassan really represents a firm that is probably top-notch and one of the best advising firms that you can find on these subjects today. To my view, as a private sector representative, they're probably sometimes a bit too close to regulators, but on the other hand, those who are close understand them better than we will ever do. So Ghassan, welcome on this panel. I have thought to introduce you to show you just a few slides to set the stage. Now, when we talk about forthcoming MENA FATF reviews, you will not only have the United Arab Emirates, we still have one that has not been published on Yemen, as I know. We will have Egypt, we will have Qatar, we will have the Lebanon, we will have Oman, and we will have Kuwait. So there's a whole series of reviews coming. The interesting experience will be whether people will, in a way, have an influence one on the other. We have seen Saudi Arabia, we have seen Bahrain, so let's see how this goes forward. But when we talk today, we're of course focused on the United Arab Emirates, but there's more to come for the region. And I think the outcome of the United Arab Emirates, as always, will also have an influence on the outcome for the other countries to come. Now, I've done some calculations. When FATF, of course, gives 40 recommendations and then the 11 comments on effectiveness, we always at the Basel Institute try to convert this into a kind of rating. The FATF is not so happy if you call this rating, because this automatically means that you compare one rating to the other, and that is not really what they want. But of course, this world is a world of competition, and therefore each country wants to compare itself to others. We have just used the term compliance as being a number 3, largely compliant number 2, partially 1, and non-compliant a 0. If you do this, then the outcome for Bahrain in technical compliance would be 2.05. As I said, 3 would be the top, and 0 is the worst. So 2.05 is not so bad. It's an 86.3 achievement out of the available ratings. But you will see something else. When you look at effectiveness, that is the new rating that Mr. Mansour will describe. The rating is substantially lower with 1.227, which is only 46.7%. So when you go into your UAE review, you will see that technical compliance, that is the legal stuff, have you got an FIU, what is the legal background, etc. That is where most countries are a bit further up, but effectiveness, that's the difficult piece. Saudi Arabia has also done fairly well on technical compliance, a bit worse probably on effectiveness. And now to compare this, I've also put in Tunisia. Now Tunisia apparently is not yet up to state when it comes to effectiveness. There's a lot to be done. And I've also compared it with a number of other countries, and there you see that they are not too far away from each other when you talk about technical compliance, but there are still substantive differences when it comes to effectiveness. When you look at the critical recommendations, those recommendations where all 70 countries that have been rated so far have got very low marks. It is sanctions related to proliferation. There most countries are not yet up to speed. Transparency on beneficial owners, that is what Mr. Massour mentioned this morning, and what we should repeat is that beneficial ownership identification is still a critical subject. And finally, and this was also mentioned, is the non-financial sector and their compliance with anti-money laundering requirements. Those are ratings that go across the globe, so this is nothing specific to the region. It is just a general recognition. Even the United States, I can tell you, do not do too fine when it comes to beneficial owner identification. Effectiveness, that is now the implementation of money laundering and counterterrorism finance measures. It is again the tolerance of misuse of beneficial ownership. And finally, and again, this is not specific to the region, but a general problem is the identification of the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. So again, when you live close to countries that might be subject of suspicion of proliferation, this is something you should watch very closely. This is just a bit of an overview where you can see the discrepancy between effectiveness. This is the upper, this is the columns, and the technical compliance, that is the upper line. As you can see, most regions are not so bad when it comes to the upper line, but there is still a massive discrepancy when it comes to effectiveness. It's the same when you look at some countries that we have seen discrepancies when it comes to effectiveness, but quite an equal distribution where you talk about technical compliance. That's why, in my view, effectiveness is really the area where you should focus on when you prepare your peer group review. That is just my introduction to set the stage. I now would ask Qasim, who is advising countries and central banks on how they should prepare, to say a few words what they do in their consultancy work. And then Mr. Mansour kindly has offered that with his experience with peer group reviews, that he shows you a number of slides how you should really prepare and how the structure and the process works of such a peer group review. So we're particularly honored, and I think it's very good to have him here as the absolute expert. But first, I want to give the floor to Qasim and then to Mr. Mansour.
Thank you, Hans. Thank you. First, I'm not going to be speaking about the UAE in particular, so about the entire region. I would say the MEA region, Middle East and Africa, that's where I'm operating. What Hans was mentioning about the effectiveness versus the technical compliance. Yes, in the past, a lot of countries focused on the technical, so that's why we're seeing a very high score. However, effectiveness, this is the biggest issue. It's new. A lot of countries don't know about it, don't know how they're going to be evaluated, how they're going to be, how to demonstrate effectiveness. It's still a new topic, and it's still in a learning process. We see regulators that are taking more and more supervisors focusing on these issues. However, the financial sector to some extent, however, the non-financial sector, the DNFBs, the DNFBPs and the others are not yet informed or understanding the process. Also, there's something very important is there's a big discrepancies in the region, even within the sub-regions between countries. Some countries are much more well prepared and some countries don't have any program in place. They don't even have the basic system. And sadly, they all operate. We think about, for example, Somalia. Yes, it is in the African Ocean, it is in the African continent. However, it's very close to Dubai. It's one of the largest trading partners of Dubai. A lot of financial transactions are happening between both countries. So, but Somalia don't have any capacities and capabilities. They have a very limited FIUs. They're just building themselves. So discrepancies is big when it comes to understanding the FATF, the recommendations, but also the processes itself. Now, countries that we have interacted with in the region, the key concerns is they would like more guidance on the evaluations. Again, they are supervisors that don't even understand the process itself, and I will let Dr. Mansour speak about the process itself, but a significant amount of regulators and supervisors don't understand the process, and they would like to learn more about this. A key element is the public-private. So whenever we go to those trainings, we see a lower presence of the private sector. They're not engaged. Yes, we see large banks present, etc. However, the other financial institutions, the MSBs, and the non-financial institutions are not. Less interactions between the public and the private. This is a big gap. But again, it's a process. People are learning more about this and bringing them more to the tables. It was brought before, transparency and openness about the process. This is a big issue. Countries are asking, the private sector are asking regulators to be more open about the FATF evaluation process, about their requirements. They're not receiving any feedback. Again, I'm not specifically pointing at any country, it's just in general, those are observations. And there's a lack of sustained engagement between the public and the private sector. Capacities of the FIUs. Some countries are extremely well developed. They have FIUs that knows their jobs, that have been efficient. However, a significant amount of countries in the regions and the sub-regions don't have any FIU capacity. They're focusing only on some basic elements of AML and CTF. There's some positive points, as a lot of focus have been given to CTF operations. So we're seeing good, for example, the recent Saudi MER gave some positive on CTF. Saudi took some significant steps on this. On the AML side, on the proliferation side, there is less, I'm not pointing at Saudi, but on other countries, there is less focus on these issues. And most importantly is cooperation, third-party request, but also cooperation, not only between countries, but inter-agencies cooperations. This is a big issue. We don't see any, they don't know each other. I'll give an example here. FATF recently issued the issue of human smuggling as a threat, as a money laundering and terrorist financing threat. They issued their report, I think it was last year or the year before last. When you investigate human smuggling, which is becoming a major issue, there are transnational flows of money, but also of individuals, of operations. And whenever a country, let's say in Kenya, they have some suspicious on human smugglings, and they're trying to get from their neighboring countries any support or cooperation, there is no. So investigation don't lead to anywhere. And sometimes the financials just moved from Kenya to Somalia to Sudan to Libya to Turkey or to UAE or to Saudi Arabia. So this lack of cooperations and understanding of the financial flows of this criminal enterprise is a big impediment for investigator, but also for countries. So I would like to get more into conversation and let Dr. Mansour speak more about the processes of the FATF. But again, I want to stress the difference and the difference in capacities and understanding among countries in the region. So thank you, and I'll let here.
So, Kashim, thank you very much for setting the stage. I think it's good to have this wider background, and the conclusion for me is you should not only look at the country under review, but also what is around and what is this country interconnected with, yes, because that has an impact.
If I can say something very quickly here. So when you do the national risk assessment, by the way, a lot of countries don't even know how to evaluate the risk, their national risk, how to assess it. Not only how to assess it, how to understand it, and what are the risk-based approach. There are a lot of technical capacities to do this. But if you look at Saudi, when they look at the risk-based assessment, Yemen is on the border. So understanding the Yemeni risk is important for Saudis. However, Yemen don't have a national risk base, they don't have a national risk assessment. So this becomes an impediment not only for Yemen, but it becomes also an impediment for Saudi not understanding the cross-border financial risk. That's an example here.
Okay.
I want to say yes. Thank you.
Dr. Mansour.
Thank you, Hans. I'm really humbled by what Hans said about me. I'm just, and I work in the field, and I think one of those that have been around for quite some time. Actually, my expertise is derived expertise mainly from my country and also from my team. Lebanon, we're a small country. We have a very vibrant financial center. It's one of the earliest regional financial centers in the region, and that dates back to the after World War. Everybody is cognizant on the importance of the financial sector. We have a huge political fragmentation in the country. We had quite an internal political strife that ripped the country for 16 years. But everybody, all these fighting, politicking parties, they converge on the importance of protecting the sector, and that's the only relief that we have. So whenever there is something that needs to be done to protect the financial and the integrity of the financial sector, it's done. And we have the support of the political leadership from all factions. So that's something I have to say. Also, that said, we were one of the earliest countries in the region to have its AML laws, and Lebanon spearheaded the creation of the MENA FATF, and Lebanon was the first president of the MENA FATF, and last year we took the presidency again under my leadership. So this is where I'm coming from. That's how we accumulate all that expertise. On the mutual evaluation, we are there whenever it is needed. We attempt to be participant in every mutual evaluation assessment in the region. And with the shortage of assessors worldwide now, FATF has, in this round 4, every time there's an assessment, they're calling worldwide for assessors to be participating in the teams of other countries. So from Lebanon, we had one colonel that participated in the assessment of Greece. Another was also called for another assessment that's still in the making. And in the region, we had practically in every one of the assessment in the region, we were there on 1 or 2. It's a heavy, time-consuming, costly process because the country has to finance most of the cost of the assessor. When we nominate an assessor, we have to pay, first of all, the time is on us, so there is no reimbursement, the travel, and sometimes the accommodation. So it's basically most of the cost of the assessor is borne by the country, yet we do that, and we are happy to participate and invest, and that's a very great learning experience. And this is how we catch up on what's happening, and we integrate in our system, and we move from there onward. So I should give credit to all those, my team, the people that work around me, to my country, for all the support that we have here. Now to Robin. Okay, fine. Yeah, it's loaded. So I have a quick kind of overview for you, and I have something for the compliance officers, lessons learned, where were the pitfalls in the assessment that were identified. But of course, to be fair, I'm going to talk to you about some weaknesses, pitfalls on the side of the financial sector, where they were, and also on the part of regulators. So just to be even-handed in this kind of exercise. We talked in the morning that the assessment process has two prongs, two tracks. One is technical. These are the 40 recommendations, and the 40 recommendations cover all the financial, law enforcement, judicial, the international cooperation sectors from different aspects. So this is an assessment about whether you have interpreted the FAA recommendation within the local legislation to the fullest extent that the FATF wants to. And that was the purpose of all the rounds of assessment in the world, specifically in the FATF, on the FATF level, round 1 to 3. FATF countries, which are 38 countries, are now undergoing through round 4. In the region, it is round 2. That's because MENA FATF was created 15 years later after the creation of the FATF. FATF came to exist in 1990, and the MENA FATF came into existence in 2006. So that's 15 years. That's about 3 rounds, because the previous rounds of FATF used to be about 4 years each. Now this is going much longer. It's different now in time space. So all previous rounds were all on technical grounds. Now with round 3, FATF realized that basically what's required in the local legislation is almost there. And they moved the bar to another step, which is called effectiveness. And that's the tricky thing. All the problem that Her Excellency talked about and all the agony that countries are going through now is on the effectiveness level. And I'll talk to you in a while about what we mean by effectiveness. So we have 40 recommendations on the technical side and 11 recommendations on the, 40 recommendations on the technical side and 11 on IOs. We call them immediate outcome. That's to measure the effectiveness of the country. Effectiveness of implementation. The recs on the regulation and supervision, which relates basically to your part of job. It's about assessing risk. It's about the customer due diligence. It's additional measures for specific customers and activities, the PEPs, correspondent bankings, money value transfer businesses, new technologies, wire transfers. Also on reliance, that's if you rely on a correspondent bank or random correspondent banking relationship, controls, financial groups. Then you have the reporting of suspicious transactions. Then you have the designated non-financial businesses and professions. So that's the part that relates mostly to you as compliance and officers and bankers. And the other part, which relates to also the same, but on the effectiveness, it's on 2 levels. Level 1, IO3, this is concerning the supervisor. That's for the regulators, not for you, the compliance officers. So IO3 attempts to measure the supervisors if the supervisors appropriately supervise, monitor, and regulate the financial institutions. And this is, I'm reading the exact wording of the IO3, or part of it. And the designated non-financial bodies and professionals for compliance with AML-CFT requirements commensurate with the risks. And IO4, this relates to financial institutions and DNFBPs. And that's the trick here, because the IO here does not differentiate between, on this level, between the financial institutions, their supervision, and the DNFBPs and their supervision. And the problem why a low rating many countries have achieved here is not because their financial institution supervision is not effective, it's because they lag on the DNFBPs, and particularly the legal and accounting professions, and also the jurors and real estate sectors. If they are real estate brokers, if these sectors compose a very important chunk in the GDP. In certain areas where these sectors are not that important, well, the effect is, of course, proportionate. But most of the countries are hit here because of the DNFBPs. And I'll give some example about it in a while. Then we move now to the issues. Now, in red, this is the question that the assessor will have to respond to. One of the questions, of course, how well do banks and financial institutions understand their money laundering and TF risks and anti-money laundering CFT obligations? Now, this is just a title, but below this title, there's a whole long list of sub-issues that the assessors have to address. Just keep in mind that the MER reports are sometimes, on the previous rounds, they could be well beyond 1,000 pages. It's about really getting to the small nitty-gritty things, comments on you have this in your regulation, you don't have the one in that regulation. Just before walking in, I received an email from the MENA FATF Secretariat saying that they are uploading the report on Jordan, but it's a very long one, so some may not get it through the email, and they're asking the countries to contact the Secretariat to see how they can communicate it, because it's a pretty long report. So this is just to tell you how extensive the work is done. So let's take some of these questions to get you a flavor of what the assessors are up to. One is, did banks and financial institutions participate in the national risk process, i.e., and this is partly to the regulator or the guys in charge in the country of conducting the NRA, because this is the agency in charge of doing this within the, it could be the FIU, it could be central bank, but somebody within the government or the regulatory agency should be conducting or in charge of conducting this study. So what they need to do is they need to send certain questionnaires to the financial institutions with specific questions, asking them about so many aspects. So one question is, this is a global overall one, did the banks and FIs participate in the NRA? So if you did not receive that questionnaire or did not attend any kind of a workshop on a round on this thing, so that's a failing point. And you start adding up. Second question, did the authority responsible for preparing the NRA disseminate the results to banks and financial institutions so that they have a clear understanding of the money laundering and terrorism financing risk? So the NRA is prepared for a purpose. It's not to be put in a drawer. It's to be disseminated to the relevant sectors so that they take note of where are the areas and pockets of risk. And the following question tells you why. Did banks and FI applied a risk-based approach aligned with the NRA? So imagine the NRA document is stating that, say, drug trafficking is a high-risk kind of a crime in that geographical part of the country. And in your own financial institution, you as compliance officers or whoever within the financial institution carried out a risk-based approach and waiting for the risks and considered that the risk of drug trafficking is medium. At the time, the NRA stated that risk is high. This discrepancy is sort of a very negative issue, and now also you get a negative rating here. It's only when you are on the same level or if you have exceeded that level and said if the rating is medium and you said it's high, then it's up to you. You can be over-conservative. You can lose more business by being over-conservative, but that's fine. For the rating, you are still in line or above. So these are the kind of questions that really assessors go through. And you should know that there are, I would say, hundreds of these questions on every section of the work. Number 4,
Dr.
banks,
Mansour, may I ask a question?
Go
The national risk assessment for the United Arab Emirates has been done.
in principle,
Has it been distributed?
well,
Have you received, hands up who has received or read a copy of the national risk assessment for the United Arab Emirates? So you've received it, so it's been distributed? Well, there's a bit of homework to do for all of you, as you have just learned. You better go and read this national risk assessment before the assessors come in and ask you whether you've seen it and whether you have been involved in this.
mind you, it's not mandatory to disseminate the whole document, but it's up to the authority to disseminate those parts
Yeah.
that they think are appropriate
Real
and deemed necessary. So you may not receive the whole document. It's not mandatory.
But many countries publish it on their
Yes,
on the website.
and that's total transparency if they wish to, but that's not a requirement. It's up to the country to decide what parts to disseminate and to whom they disseminate. The fourth question is about understanding the money laundering risks that the financial institutions are exposed to, and it's not based on, it should be based on a structured assessment. That's the RBA risk that you conduct within the institution should be a subjective, well-structured kind of study. It shouldn't be based on, let's say, kind of external studies, journalism kind of or investigative kind of reports. You should conduct your own structured study, and the issue that you will be, the assessors will be having face-to-face interviews with some of you. These are not going to be desk kind of investigation. You could be selected for a face-to-face meeting, and you could be asked these questions. And the important thing, again, I was talking to some officials here that I hope that the authorities would also work out with you in preparation for these sessions, because you would need to probably respond and give the same kind of responses to the assessors on same issues that have been given by the regulators. Otherwise, if there is this kind of discrepancy, and this is a very, I mean, it's not doesn't play well for the country. Number 5, if banks and financial institutions affiliated to international groups identify and assess domestic money laundering risks facing their businesses. This is pretty important for the international banks operating in the country. Sometimes XYZ Bank, an international bank, who have extremely good, very diligent kind of a head office and world compliance function, and they have their own assessment of the global risk. And obviously, when they operate within a country, they need to comply with that risk. But that's fine, because going from a controller kind of a centralized compliance function, whereby the head office should be assessing the regional risk, and or let's say ask for all branches and affiliates to comply with this global risk assessment in order to be rated well in the home country. That's fine, that's granted, has to be done, but in a domestic market, you have still to take care of the domestic risks. Take an example, if the money transfer businesses are rated by a European bank as low risk, because these kind of businesses are highly regulated in Europe, they might not be the same in other regions. So if the risk rating is low on the global financial institution level, then it may not be the same on the domestic level. And this is extremely also important, that risk assessment should be revisited, and the domestic market risk should be assessed and added on, integrated to the global policy of the financial institution. Well, we have quite some more here, and it goes on like this. I would like to jump here to like question number 2. How well do the financial institutions apply mitigating measures commensurate with the risk? Yes, you defined probably within your institution that PEPs is a high risk. That's fine. And by virtue of the study that you have made, but then you have to demonstrate how well you are mitigating the risks. One ultimate mitigation of the risk, you say, no accounts for PEPs. So that's an action that implements your assessment of that high risk. But if you say PEPs is high risk, and you stop there without taking any mitigating measures, then that doesn't bode well for you. And also the same, if you identify a certain industry, then you have to demonstrate that you have devised certain measures that takes care of this higher level of risk. Then on another question, how well do banks apply CDD and record-keeping measures? To what extent is business refused when CDD incomplete? I think we talked a lot this morning on the beneficial ownership, and here, if banks should be cognizant and systematically weigh on the entities if the beneficial ownership is not being well identified or identified in a limited way, that has its negative impact on the effectiveness in assessing and managing the risks, so that banks and financial institutions do not do their CDD properly and rely mainly on custom statements. We saw this kind of a lax situation. I don't think this is happening anymore to a great extent in the region, whereby the KYC is filled lightly, and it's the statements of the customer are taken and filled down without any further vetting or further kind of verification. Okay, what should we do more? Like some of them, like the absence of basic, number 4, basic identification system, the KYC system, some of those fail still to demonstrate, and these are the statements here are taken out of certain reports that demonstrate the weaknesses that have taken place under the item number 3 or above. Number 5, also on beneficial ownership, the framework for effective prevention of criminals from participating in ownership, control, or management of financial institutions is weak, such as you take on a shareholder or a director whose name is tainted. It's pretty well known in the community, and that doesn't bode well because you have not taken the due CDD measure when taking on the shareholders or directors. Okay, PEPs. Choose a good risk. Okay. Number 3, there are new products always coming on the market. Then we take over a new product. No due assessment of the product for money laundering is taken up front, and you delve into the product and take all the risks that really come up with the product. So banks or financial institutions can decide that the new electronic payment method, including prepaid card, online payment, etc., are only offered to customers who already have a bank account. So with the risks associated with such product, you may do some mitigation of the risk and install some measures. If you take over the products and start delivering these products without due assessment, then I think this is awfully risky. Number 4, here it's a combined also kind of a duty on the regulatory agency to explain pretty well the requirements to comply with United Nations Security Council Resolution 1267, 1373. They were discussed before by my friend Ghaith, just in the session before the last one. Here it's pretty important that sometimes the financial institutions believe or think that they have only to vet the names against the list of the UNSCR. This is not complete. You should vet the name first on ongoing basis, and more importantly, all institutions should be cognizant that in case a transaction or a name comes across, they need to freeze immediately the transaction and report it to the FIU. And some of them are really they don't have a clue about this issue, and they fail on this regard. There are, number 5, there are the public statements issued by FATF, and there are two kinds, not two kinds, I mean the public statement has, it's rather, the main list within, sub-list within the list are the following. One is the dark list. On this dark list, there are currently just 2 names. It's North Korea and Iran. And here, all countries are required not only to stop dealing with these countries, but to take countermeasures. And actually, Iran was relieved from this when they went, when the agreement was signed during the Obama administration, and now it is really hanging up in the air because Iran should have taken up certain corrective measures, which they have an action plan of 10 steps. Actually, they covered so far only 3, and they are the threat of being replaced back under the dark list, like the Koreans, whereby countries have to take not care of not dealing, but also to take countermeasures against the such transactions. So here, this is one sub-list. The other sub-list is countries with weaknesses in their financial AML, CFT regimes, and such countries have undertaken to a certain action plan to adjust and fix all these glitches in their systems. And their care should be taken when dealing with these countries. And there is quite a differentiation in between the two. And then there are the other countries.
May I ask you just one question here on Iran? I think it's easy for financial institutions when you have global uniform sanctions, but it becomes more difficult when different countries have different sanctions. And then you have to decide which you should follow. What is your advice? Which sanctions banks in the UAE should now follow under these?
Well, it's pretty simple. FATF issues at the end of every meeting a public statement. And the public statement is pretty clear. There is the few countries on this very dark list. As I said, now there is 1 on the dark list, and Iran is hanging. It was there, it was removed, it may go back. And the rest is just to be cautious when dealing, and you have to take additional enhanced measures when dealing with the other countries. And of course, there are the 4th category, which is the normal going countries, which you need to do. But this is a public statement as its name is. And all you need is to take it from the website and just integrate it in your daily operation. That's pretty straightforward kind of a
So that is an FATF rule. This is not the sanctions rule, whether it's US sanctions or European sanctions.
Yeah, absolutely. This is an FATF, exactly. Now, number 5, to what extent do the financial institutions meet the reporting obligations, suspected proceeds of crime, and funds in support terrorism? What are the practical measures to prevent tipping off? Here, one of the questions to see if really compliance officers understand pretty well the differences between the different risks, like money laundering risk and terrorism financing risk. And of course, there are quite some basic differences in between. Like in money laundering risk, you should realize that money laundering is a second crime, i.e. it would have been preceded by a predicate offense, which is the original crime that generated the illicit funds. And money laundering crime is the way by which the criminals are trying to hide the criminal source of the funds. So money laundering is a second crime. It must have been preceded by an original crime which generated the illicit proceeds. If there is no original crime, there is no money laundering crime. So this is pretty important. So in money laundering, the predicate offense would have occurred, and the perpetrators are trying to launder the money. Normally, money are sizable. In terrorism financing, we are trying really to stop a terrorism act from happening. And second, the terrorism money has proven to be, in most cases, to be not pretty much genuine and licit money, that's is lawful money. There are the self-radicalized people who take part of their savings out of their very legal work. They buy the tickets and travel to conflict zone, and this is perfectly good money. So it's not easy to detect the intentions of somebody going to the crime scene, and this is a basic difference. Whereby money laundering is much easier, whereby the money, as I said, does have a criminal source, and there are quite some experience developed by most of the compliance officers in dealing with it. Terrorism is a different thing. As I said, it's smaller amounts. It could be good money, not illicit money, and the tracking it is much more difficult. I think I'll stop here and to talk one slide on the part of the supervisors. Supervisors appeared in some of the MERs not to have fully applied or say conducted the NRA and applied the consequences or results of the FIA to the financial institutions and the designated non-financial bodies and professions. So this is a problem on the supervisors. Second, the amount of information available to supervisors to assist them in identifying and monitoring money laundering risk on an ongoing basis for both FIs and DNFBPs is quite limited. This is a major loophole here. And third, there are a number of new products, services provided by financial institutions where the supervisory authority has yet to develop an understanding thereof. And this is quite an issue. And the fourth one is about sometimes you have different supervisor to the financial institutions, and then the different supervisors are issuing different directives, sometimes conflicting, and this is pretty bad on the local scene because it really mars the understanding of money laundering in the minds of the supervisor, and they get perplexed in this issue. I think you can read the rest because that relates mainly to supervisors. There is something about the domestic coordination between the authorities, etc., and so on. The important thing to take here is the MER is a pretty elaborate, pretty detailed process. It affects the financial institutions, the legal system, the the law enforcement system, and the country international cooperation on different levels, on information exchange, on judicial exchange, on police exchange with the other countries. So these are two different levels. And MER is a country assessment. It's not assessing neither the FIU nor the financial sector. It's a country assessment. That's why you have this national committee that oversees all the actions related thereto. And I'll stop here. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mansour. I think this was very impressive, and in fact, I've never heard it that way, but that really gives you a feeling of what you have to expect from this forthcoming review. Because I think the difference to the old methodology and the new methodology is now that those reviewers not only talk to the authorities, they will also talk to the banks. And they will ask the banks about the authorities and the other way around. Is that correct understanding?
Right, more so than before. Before they would interact with the financial system, but not to the extent that it is here in the new one.
So you will have to see, I think they usually pick a number of financial institutions that they consider suitable, and then they say, well, can we talk to the PEP specialist, and can we talk to the risk specialist, etc.?
They will.
And
absolutely, and they may not necessarily pick the larger ones. It's at will. So the assessors will pick their list and ask the local coordinator to arrange for the meetings. And they would go and put the questions. And the important thing, whatever you say, that's it. So if you say something that may conflict with a statement given by the regulator, then this is the difference. Then the country cannot go back and say, no, what they said is wrong, look at this documentation, look at here. No, they would take your statements as really a final statement. So that's why I'm saying you need to get sometimes, along with the authorities, coordinate what needs to be, because the authorities know the question that I'm posing, because they would have experts, same as we have, and they would tell you, you could be asked this and that, and this is what we have, this is what we are saying, what do you think? And they would probably agree with you on the kind of response. And this is important to be in sync. Any differences here will not play well to the country.
When those reviewers go and see the financial institutions, are they accompanied by local regulators, or will they go there on their own so that there are no witnesses who can?
Well, when they go, the team is probably 7 or 8 guys, so it would be more than one going, but they would be mostly alone.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to have this total
So
independence.
you can't have your national supervisor sitting there and say, "Oh, what you're telling is not the truth." So, yeah, if the discrepancies are there, they will.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think so, no. See, in one country,
Look,
just...
we've got 4 minutes left before drinks. So, I will ask a last question, but I will keep that. As you are those who will have to go through this process, I think this is the unique opportunity for you to ask Hashim and Mr. Mansour a question of how you should get ready to get this behind you in a decent manner. Questions? Probably the authorities here have prepared.
Hopefully,
Good
news for me.
It's impressive. But probably the questions will only come after the reviews, and then I can tell you it's too late. So let me ask you a last question, and that is, we have seen on my first slide that historically it took the FATF about 10 years before they came back. Now, we have seen that our friends in Norway, who are all good people, who live up there in the north in the cold, that they screwed up with their review. Let's put it in clear language. But you now get a second chance, if I understand correctly, and if the outcome is not as it should be, then you can probably give a call to Mr. Mansour and say, look, I think we have improved in the meantime. Can we have a review of the review, or how does that work?
Of course, there's this follow-up process. Then, when the first report or rating is out, at the same time, the country would be provided with depending on the degree of rating, with the follow-up process. So it could be under extensive follow-up process, i.e., every 6 months they have to report what they fixed. Or it could be on a longer period. And the IOs, the difficulty about it, that you will not have a chance to defend your case before probably, I think, 2 years or 5 years.
2 years.
So that's an awfully long time, because you need to not only fix things, but to establish a track record. And track record on a 6-month basis is not enough. So your first chance will be after 2 years to come to the meeting and say, okay, look at my stats, look at my situation, I fix up the thing, and then the assessors would go through also another review, which may require, if they're satisfied by what you provided, for a site visit, and to decide that this is good enough to be taken to the plenary for a re-rating. On the technical side, if you have some fixes, that's fine. I think you can apply for re-rating within a much shorter period. But on the IO, that's a much longer period.
Look, I always want to end on a happy note. So the happy note is, if what nobody hopes, but what we know in real life can happen, that the outcome of the review will not as everybody has hoped. There will be a second, and there will even be a third chance. So you will not be under this stigma for the next 10 years.
Yeah.
No, you can come back, you can do better. There's a second and there's a third exam until you have reached all the goals you have set you. It's now 0 seconds left. Ladies and gentlemen, many thanks for your patience. Many thanks for staying with us.